fill in the gaps. And so I've been thinking about this because we do issues on we're starting to do issues on more controversial subjects, like the environment, for example. So the next issue of Skeptic has an excerpt from Jared Diamond's new book, Collapse, and an excerpt from another book by Richard Posner called Catastrophe. And it's all these things that could happen to the environment because of us or natural factors. And so, you know, what's the story here? And what you see in the media is this sort of parade of talking heads, the left-wing scientists and the right-wing scientists, and particularly about the environment. Why don't we have scientists with no wings? Why do scientists have wings? What's the deal with this? And when Jared's book came out, Collapse, last week, I thought, well, it'll be interesting to see the reception of this, because Jared is fairly well known as being kind of pro-environmental movement. And he's a good scientist, so what's he going to say, and how will it be received? So I get the Wall Street Journal, and that was the first review I saw. I thought, the Wall Street Journal, this will be interesting, because it's a fairly conservative free market paper. And they assigned to review it Francis Fukuyama, who's a fairly well-known conservative intellectual. And I thought, I know what it's going to say. I didn't even have to read it. And it said exactly what I thought it would say, that, you know, Jared's his academic liberal bias slanted him away from free markets, and he didn't identify how free markets are good at solving environmental problems and so on and so forth. When in fact, Jared has a whole section on corporations in America and elsewhere that have done far more for the environment than local non-government organizations and other national parks in local areas. And you should write those and praise those corporations and buy their companies. And by the way, here's a list of the bad companies. And so he actually does this, but predictably. Then I saw the review of that book, Collapse, in the LA Times, a fairly liberal paper. And that was by Brian Fagan, who tends to be more pro-environment. And he gave Jared's book a very favorable review. And this happens with opinion editorials. Another example, Michael Crichton's new book, State of Fear, which is kind of what has been loosely called the first neocon novel. I guess the pre-neocon novels were Ayn Rand's novels. So now Michael Crichton is a neocon novelist, so labeled by Steve Wasserman, the publisher of the LA Times book review. He rarely reviews books, but he targeted that one and was very critical. Then I saw the Wall Street Journal review of Crichton's book, and it was assigned to Ron Bailey, who is the science editor of Reason magazine, which is a libertarian magazine. So of course, it got a very praiseworthy review. And I find this really interesting that the editor of a newspaper or magazine, and I am one of a magazine, you can dictate how the review is going to come out just by who you pick. You know what they're going to say. And I write quite a few op-eds for the LA Times, since I live there. And sometimes they'll publish something I just send in, but often they'll call me, because they kind of know what I do and what my positions on various things are, and they'll ask me. They'll actually say, we're looking for somebody to write an opinion editorial that takes this stance. We think you're that guy. Is that right? Is that about it? Because if it is, then, you know, if you can get us something by 2 o'clock, we'll have it tomorrow. If not, who would you recommend? And so, now of course, that's editorial. Opinion editorials is not quite the same as the news. However, of course, as you know from watching CNN or Fox, one's more liberal, one's more conservative. It depends on who you assign to the story. Now, if it's just politics, okay, who cares, because it's not science. But so much of science is politics, and I find it upsetting to know that I can tell what's going to be said about a complicated issue like the environment, global warming, before I even read it based on who I know wrote it. And that's, I don't know, there's something wrong about that. We should be following the data, right? But the problem is it's a complex, hard issue, and the data are not always clear. So that leaves room for debate, I suppose. Anyway, I'm going to close with a reading. You're supposed to do a reading when you have a new book. So actually, to kind of wrap it up, since I'm going to quit a little bit early here. I talk in the book about the silicone breast implant case, where Dow Corning had been sued to the tune of $4.25 billion to settle on the order of 19,092 individual claims against it by women who had had silicone breast implants made by Dow Corning, who also had these degenerative tissue diseases. And I talk about the background to that and so on, and start with Dr. Marcia Angel, who wrote the editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine, explaining that this was nothing more than a chance overlap between two populations. 1% of American women have silicone breast implants. 1% of American women have autoimmune or degenerative tissue diseases. With millions of women in each of these categories, by chance, tens of thousands will have both implants and disease, even though there's no causal connection. That's all there is to it. Why then, in this age of modern science, was this not clear to judges and juries? Because Bacon's idols of the marketplace dictate that scientists and lawyers speak two different languages that represent dramatically different ways of thinking. The law is adversarial. Lawyers are pitted against one another. There will be a winner and a loser. Evidence is to be marshaled and winnowed to best support your side in order to defeat your opponent. As an attorney for the prosecution, it doesn't matter if silicon actually causes disease. It only matters if you can convince a jury that it does. Science, by contrast, attempts to answer questions about the way the world really works. Although scientists may be competitive with one another, the system is self-correcting and self-policing, with a long-term collective and cooperative goal of determining the truth. Scientists want to know if silicon really causes disease. Either it does or it does not. Marcia Angel wrote a book on Science on Trial, in which she explained how, quote, a lawyer questioning an epidemiologist in a deposition asked him why he was undertaking a study of breast implants when one had already been done. To the lawyer, a second study clearly implied that there was something wrong with the first. The epidemiologist was initially confused by the line of questioning when he explained that no single study was conclusive, that all studies yielded tentative answers, that he was looking for consistency among a number of different design studies. It was the lawyer's turn to be confused. Close quote. As executive editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, Angel recalled that she was occasionally asked why the journal does not publish studies, quote, on the other side, a concept, she explained, that has no meaning in medical research. There is another side to an issue only if the data warrant it, not by fiat. The case of Marcia Angel is an enlightening one. She opens her book with a confession. I consider myself a feminist, by which I mean that I believe that women should have political, economic, and social rights equal to those of men. As such, I'm alert to discriminatory practices against women, which some feminists believe lie at the heart of the breast implant controversy. I'm also a liberal Democrat. I believe that an unbridled free market leads to abuses and injustices, and that government and the law need to play an active role in preventing them. Because of this view, I am quick to see the iniquities of large corporations. Close quote. What is a disclaimer doing like this doing in a science book? She explains, quote, I disclose my political philosophy here because it did not serve me well in examining the breast implant controversy. The facts were simply not as I expected they would be. But my most fundamental belief is that one should follow the evidence wherever it leads, close quote. Francis Bacon would approve. Thank you. Randy?
As we know, a very good friend of the JREF, and this is a cooperative conference that we have going here, and he certainly helped a great deal, and it's very fitting that we have him right at the very top of the performances this evening. It's all right, I'm inside, I don't know what it's like outside. Give me it's daytime, okay. Thank you. I have somebody at the door to check on these things for me. I don't know what Michael does with all these. There certainly isn't room on his wall for them, but I ask you to nudge a few of them over there from some other organizations and stick this up someplace or other. Michael Shermer, with the sincere gratitude of the James Randi Educational Foundation, another plaque.
Another plaque. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.